This video we're going to look at the different cells that make up your nervous system. Now you think first of the neurons, and of course we're going to be getting into neurons and how they function, as well as the different types of neurons involved in your nervous system. But before we get into the neurons, we're going to talk about the different neuroglial cells. Neuroglial cells are all the other cells besides the neurons that are in your CNS and PNS. Now, the word glia means glue. They originally thought these cells were just holding the neurons in place. Then we found out that there are many types of neuroglial cells, and without these neuroglial cells, the neurons would not function properly. So these are all cells that play more of a supporting role to the neurons. Each of them have a different appearance, so a lot of times we look at a nice artistic drawing to look at their different shapes and maybe how many processes they have and what might those processes do for that cell. So we're going to refer to that picture a little bit and then go down the 6 neuroglial cells. 4 of them being in the CNS. We're going to do those first. So there's 4 neuroglial cells in your central nervous system. And then there are 2 types of neuroglial cells in your peripheral nervous system. The first neuroglial cell type are the astrocytes. Astro refers to their shape. They're believed to look like a star-shaped cell. So over here there's a few drawings of the astrocytes shown in this blue, and it looks like they're all somewhat star-shaped because they have these different processes that stick off of their cell body. They're the most abundant and versatile neuroglial cell, so they do a number of things for your nervous system. What we're going to try to do is highlight the most important functions of each of these neuroglial cells. But your astrocytes are going to do a number of things. They attach to many neurons, so they're thought to kind of guide these neurons and protect these neurons. They have little synaptic endings. You'll notice that this astrocyte seems to be doing something or communicating with this neuron here. And then there's a lot of them that are just in a lot of the spaces in between the neurons. They also reach out and attach to capillaries. And this is going to be by far the more important function that we're going to discuss when it comes to astrocytes. They have these little processes, and let's try to find one right here, that kind of reach out from the cell body and surround the blood vessels in your brain. These are known as perivascular feet. They have little feet that surround the blood vessel. And what these perivascular feet do is they determine the permeability of this capillary. And we call that the blood-brain barrier. So what the astrocytes do is they don't permit as much exchange at the capillaries in your brain as capillaries in other places of the body. We often call the capillaries of your brain tight capillaries, in that certain things that might diffuse from your blood into another organ wouldn't be able to penetrate into your brain. So it acts as a barrier between the blood and the brain, hence the blood-brain barrier. So the benefit of this is there might be a toxin in your bloodstream, or maybe a pathogen of some sort circulating in your bloodstream. And this would protect your brain from that toxin or that pathogen. The downside of the blood-brain barrier is it's quite often difficult to treat brain pathologies. If we're trying to design a medication that is used to treat, let's say epilepsy or schizophrenia, or maybe we're trying to deliver an antibiotic into the brain, we have to be very concerned about the blood-brain barrier preventing that medication from getting into the brain. So that's an important function of your astrocytes. They're also very important in development of the nervous system. So they're thought to kind of guide neurons into their proper location as the brain is forming. And then they also participate in some information processing in the brain. And this is, a topic that we're not going to get into much, but they support the information processing that occurs in your CNS. So those are the astrocytes. The next neuroglial cells are known as ependymal cells, and they line some of the cavities that are found in your brain and your spinal cord. We're going to talk more about these cavities when we get to brain and spinal cord, but inside these cavities there's a fluid called cerebral spinal fluid. You may have heard of cerebral spinal fluid before, in that it can be used as a diagnostic tool. So we extract cerebral spinal fluid using a large needle from a little space surrounding your spinal cord called the subarachnoid space. And that technique is called a spinal tap or lumbar puncture. This cerebral spinal fluid is produced by these ependymal cells, and then the ependymal cells have little cilia. You can see this thin layer of cells here are the ependymal cells, and then they have little cilia that are going to circulate the fluid. The fluid in these cavities are known as ventricles. Typically, you think of a ventricle as being in your heart, but your brain has ventricles. These are cavities that contain cerebral spinal fluid. And we'll talk a lot more about cerebral spinal fluid in upcoming chapters and how important it is for your brain and spinal cord. Microglia cell were named micro because they're very small, so on this drawing they're the ones in green. The microglial cells are actually a fairly large component of the brain, 10 to 15% of the cells. And their job is more of an immune system function. So when you think of the immune system, you think of killing pathogens, bacteria, viruses. They also help repair damaged tissue in the brain. So they tend to migrate and are found close to injured neurons. And they're there to attempt to repair the neuron. But as far as another major function is to phagocytose pathogens. So they'll actually find a bacterium that might have gotten in and destroy the bacterium. They'll also be used to kind of clean up damaged tissue, debris that might be in the brain. So they're very helpful in brain injuries, brain trauma, as well as any kind of infection that might be in the brain. They're often referred to as resident macrophages. A macrophage is a phagocyte, a cell that can gobble up, if you will, or eat pathogens. So very useful in protecting that brain from injury and infection. The next ones are known as oligodendrocytes. Oligodendro means few branches. They have processes that stick off of them. And these processes are used to myelinate neurons of the CNS. So we'll talk a lot more about myelination, but myelination is a layer that surrounds the axons of a neuron in order to speed up nerve transmission. And you need cells to produce this myelin. Myelin has a lot of lipid material in it. Often we call it like an insulation to the axon. And what happens is if you have a myelinated neuron, that neuron transmits its nerve impulses much faster than an unmyelinated neuron. So if we need this neuron to transmit information very quickly from point A to point B, there's a good chance it's a myelinated neuron. So if you look closely at the drawing, you'll see an oligodendrocyte with many processes that are reaching out, surrounding the axon of a neuron and producing the myelin. And they've been found to be able to myelinate multiple neurons. So they have these branches that can reach out. You can see this guy here is reaching out and myelinating a couple different neurons. There's a different cell in the PNS that does the myelination. We're going to look at those on the next slide. Those are known as Schwann cells. So the Schwann cell, first of all, is in the periphery. So are the satellite cells. Schwann cells are analogous to the oligodendrocyte, meaning they're going to also produce myelin. The difference is, A, the location, these are in the periphery, and how they do it. A Schwann cell cannot myelinate more than a single neuron. And that's because the entire cell wraps around a small area on the axon. So here's an axon that's being myelinated by 3 different Schwann cells. The Schwann cell actually wraps its whole cell body around the axon, and in between the axon and the Schwann cell are the layers of myelin we call myelin sheaths. So they myelinate, they just do it slightly different in the PNS than the oligodendrocytes do in the CNS. One other added benefit of a Schwann cell is they are very useful in regeneration of the neurons. So, and we tend to be able to regenerate and repair peripheral nerves and neurons much better than we can the CNS. So nerves in the PNS can actually regenerate, but you need the Schwann cell. So Schwann cells are very important in that process of nerve repair or nerve regeneration. Satellite cells are also found in the PNS. They don't surround the axon, but instead they are found surrounding the cell body of neurons. So you'll notice in yellow here is the cell body of a neuron, and then attached kind of to the outer surface of that cell body are satellite cells. So they're more of a structural and supportive cell to the neurons in the PNS. So those are the neuroglial cells. There's 6 of them. Again, we should know where they're found, CNS or PNS, and then what's their major function, or maybe top 2 functions of that cell as far as your nervous system is concerned. The next video will start to get into the neurons